welcome to the webinar presentation entitled How Will Africa's Growing Population Be Fed in 2050 by Dr. Tesfaye Feraf Sida, scientist, system agronomist of the Sustainable Agri-Food Systems Program. Dr. Tesfaye Feraf Sida is a multidisciplinary researcher, educator, and research and development practitioner, emphasizing on production ecology and resource conservation. He currently holds a scientist position at CIMMYT. He organizes and runs projects that facilitate the delivery of agronomy at scale solutions, create links among institutions in digital decision support systems, assist implementation on next generation agronomy at scale innovations, and nurture internal efficiencies for demand-driven research and development in agronomy. He's passionate for data-driven decisions, has proficiency in advanced data analytics and programming tools, and more. He's experienced in dynamic systems modeling tools, and he aspires to link hands-on on farm and practical experiences to the emerging big data and digital capabilities to assist smallholder farmers benefit from the digital revolution. Dr. Tesfaye, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Isabel, for the nice introduction. And good morning, everyone. Good afternoon and good evening. I am going to make this presentation on how to feed Africa's growing population by 2050. And my presentation mainly focuses on Ethiopia's experience and the perspectives and how that can be applied to other countries in sub-Saharan Africa, perhaps with the same situations of facing challenges of producing enough to feed the growing population, so common in everywhere in African countries. So the content of my presentation is that I start by introducing what I'm going to talk about and maybe look at some of the challenges that we face in trying to transform African agriculture and what we expect the current scenario and maybe in the incoming scenarios and some efforts that the African countries took to transform their agriculture and finally look at some of the pathways that we could follow successfully to achieve food security by 2050, where we expect the African population to be close to 2 billion mouths to feed. So with that, I start by looking at the historical trends in Ethiopia. We just look for the main grains, the main cereals in Ethiopia: sorghum, wheat, and maize. These constitute more than 80% of Ethiopia's cereal production, and they also take the majority of the Ethiopia's fertile land, mainly in the highlands. And of course, and we look at this graph starting from the 90s to the 2020, productivity has immensely increased, probably from almost about 1.5 tons per hectare to 4 tons in the case of maize, for example. And most of the cereals productivity has increased. And the problem is, so has population growth. Population growth has gone up, and Ethiopia's population has doubled during that same period. So we have issues here. And if we compare this to some of the countries that have somehow transformed their productivity for
Tesfaye?
Yes.
Sorry, your slides are not moving, if I may interrupt you. Sorry. You are still on the first slide. Yeah. Apologies to interrupt your flow.
No, thank you, but that's very important. So, Isabel, what can we do? It's moving for me.
Yes, you have to move your slides from one to the other. You can push the arrows.
Yeah, I am pushing. It's moving on my screen.
Oh, but it is not on yours. Maybe you didn't. Oh, what is happening? Maybe you have to share again the screen.
Yeah. Okay. Stop and reshare.
Yes.
Let me do that. Sorry for these things that happen all the time. So now, do you see my first?
The first page.
Okay. And the second?
No, still not moving. Okay,
Okay,
now
now
it
it
is.
has come.
Okay.
Yes.
It's
Okay.
moving now.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
So yeah, it's messing up now. I don't know what's happening. Okay, anyway. And let me go on. I was here. So I was talking about the Ethiopia's success in increasing cereal productivity from almost less than 1.5 tons per hectare in average to about 3, 4, and even 5 for the case of maize. And the population has doubled during that period. So a big challenge still persisting. And looking at how Ethiopia might compare with this productivity boost, and we look at a couple of countries that did really transform their cereal production. Ethiopia is catching up. We can look at the bold line. It's visible now, Fred? Is it okay now?
Yes, it is visible. We are still on the introduction
Please,
and context, the historical trends and successes in production.
Yes, but the graph about maize and those things. Okay, so
Yes.
Ethiopia is somehow catching up now, but still behind compared to the potential that we can achieve in this country in terms of productivity. And this is for maize. And what Ethiopia did to achieve such a boost in productivity was what they call agricultural transformation, and that was based on agricultural development-led industrialization. And the assumption under that was to for the smallholders to produce surplus and feed to the industries, and then the industries serve as an input from the smallholder agricultural production and boost the general productivity backwards, because the industries are also assumed to provide some outputs like machineries, fertilizer, and other agricultural inputs to the smallholders, and gradually smallholder agriculture will be commercialized, and food and raw materials can be produced for those smallholders. In Ethiopia did establish about 11 such industrial places where the input mainly is agricultural output from the smallholders. So Ethiopia did that, but mainly did not succeed. Most of the challenges that we had still persisted. For example, more than a quarter of the population is still below poverty line. So that is an idea. That is not an ideal statistics. And food insecurity has always been a challenge. And about 12 to 16 million people face chronic hunger every year, and malnutrition is pervasive. And the country imports close to 1 billion worth of wheat alone every year. Of course, we import a lot of other agricultural products, but wheat is one of the most significant. So the early industries, these agricultural development industries, actually could not really get consistent input from the agriculture, from the smallholder agriculture, and similar scenarios can be said about many other countries in sub-Saharan Africa. And now the natural question would be, why would this kind of things happen all the time? We do a lot of things. Agricultural productivity has boosted, and a lot of policy issues seemed to be going in the right direction. And now let me revert back to some of the challenges that we face, especially in Ethiopia in terms of agricultural productivity. And the first mentionable thing would be the product qualities that we get from diverse and very heterogeneous farms. So that resulted in some poor grading, and the output from those industries could not really compete at global market because of the quality. It's very diverse. Even for coffee, which is a very core export commodity in Ethiopia, we face those kind of things where our quality could not compete, given we already produce a premium quality coffee, but even with that, we could not really compete. And the same goes to fruits, vegetables, and cereals. So that quality could also lead could also arise from the fact that we collect these products from different farms produced under different settings and using different inputs, different storage conditions, and all the value chain constraints that they face. And another thing is also in terms of quantity. If we compare Ethiopia, what they produce, for example, we have really low nutrient input, and the quantity we produce is low as a result. If you look at this picture, this is a wheat crop. I was trying to use my son's eyeglass, a temple of that, and the wheat is almost like a grass, and this is in the Central Highlands, vertisols, traditionally very productive soils, but very low inherently poor soils and not a lot of external input. And if we compare the amount of input that Ethiopia used, for example, for nitrogen annually from the 1960s to now, Ethiopia uses really low. We are a very low input kind of country, and the same can be said for phosphorus, and so we in general have a very limited biomass in the system, and that leads to shortage of feed and shortage of grain and generally low organic matter in the system, and we go into this kind of very negative feedback systems where we start with low amount of organic matter and we don't produce enough biomass, and we go again to low organic matter in the soil, and then we don't have enough yield, and that leads to a lot of problems in terms of grain production, livestock production, and all sorts of low productivity. And the same can be said for potassium. And these pictures, I took them from the all Ethiopian fertilizer trial. They did a nationwide trial to see which fertilizers are really important in Ethiopian soils, and as we can see, there is an issue. Soils with different fertilizers, they don't respond, and this challenge persists, and for a lot of nutrients actually. Nitrogen is the biggest, but also for P, for K, and some micronutrients. So if we look at these limited nutrients, I was just trying to compare some other countries, some close to Ethiopia, for example, Kenya and Argentina, where they have transformed their agriculture, and try to roughly relate. And this is you know, a very two-dimensional thing, and doesn't tell a lot of heterogeneities behind this curve. But in general, if we look at the amount of total nitrogen we use in the system and the cereal productivity, actually the initial amount is very responsive. We have this steep curve. If we look at on this hypothetical graph on the right, normally if we are on this steep curve part of the curve, using intensive input, as long as we avoid waste and improve resource use efficiency, is like a no-brainer kind of advice. So in Ethiopia, we still use less than 20 kg per hectare fertilizer in average. Some places might maybe more intensive, some places we don't use at all. So this is a very low average. And if we look at that graph on the left, Ethiopia for cereals, still we are on the steep part of the curve, and we don't see if this curve is going to bend soon. Maybe it can go a bit high before it bends, and so in general it can be safe to say maybe the system is generally input constraint, external input constraint. And if we go to the right side of this hypothetical curve, of course, we talk, the questions are different. Now we talk of optimization, maybe site-specific decisions like we talk these days. So for Ethiopia, we can safely say we are not there yet. We still are at the low part where things are responsive as long as we avoid waste and they improve resource use efficiency. Another is the labor issue in Ethiopia, labor productivity. We look at these figures, and one is on the bottom right, that is when the farmers are trying to raw plant wheat in Ethiopia. Very labor demanding, very intensive. How many labor days do we need to do those? And we not harvesting. We see the weeding women all the season, rain season, trying to weed teff. Otherwise, it's not productive at all. So, and the threshing, the same goes for threshing, and labor is very very unproductive. If we look at this graph on the left, in general, the proportion of national labor in agricultural sector is inversely related to GDP. Yeah, of course, there are a lot of drivers behind that. And Ethiopia, for example, where more than 80% of the population works in agriculture, the GDP is very low. And a lot of other countries. I just put highlight three of the countries here. So they follow traditional farming practices. Too many people, especially all the family members, are involved in these kind of working situations. The productivity, if we divide it per labor, is very low, and this kind of low productivity labor is very difficult to feed even themselves, let alone feeding the increasing urban population with a lot of shifting diet towards more proteinous and more fatty foods. And of course, if I go on, I'm going to mention a lot of constraints. I think we at CG, we know yeah, we have a lot of issues. We have a lot of problems why our agriculture is stagnant. So instead of going over that, maybe let me pass directly to what will be expected if these scenarios continue. For example, if we continue with business as usual. I again use Ethiopia as an example, and in Ethiopia. Ethiopia actually has this very ambitious agricultural transformation plan where they plan to make agriculture grow at 6.2%. That's not easy. 6.2 annual growth for the next 20, 30 years is a big call, but it's very ambitious, and they are trying to achieve that. But still, population is growing about 2.5, 2.6% per year. And with that, we still expect about 16.2 of the population, 2% of the population to be undernourished, because we know with that 6.2 increase in population, we know what we can get in terms of cereal production. So that will still leave some deficit, and we are going to face some severe food insecurity. We still will be exposed to importing millions of tons of grain, and we are going to have those deficits. So if we look at this graph, I tried to project what that can lead to. If we just increase 6%, the dashed line shows that is predicted production at 6.2, and the red and the orange lines are for export and for import and for the deficit. So the orange is the import, and the red is the deficit, and this is going to happen to some extent. We are going to shut that deficit, but still the deficit continues, and the import has to continue, even if Ethiopia managed to grow that at that ambitious rate of 6.2% per year growth in Ethiopia. So obviously, this is not the kind of route we are going to talk. So I tried to cut down all the imports and the deficits and the malnutrition, and try to hypothetically feed everyone. And for that to happen, Ethiopia has to actually grow its agriculture by 13.4% annually. So that is incredible. Yeah, we can minimize our calorie deficit. We don't import. And of course, there could be some hindsight issues of environmental sustainability and the resilience in terms of food systems. We have to all of a sudden start to intensify our agriculture at that level. And that is ignoring the question that is that possible? If we can do it, and if there are alternatives to do that, maybe we can achieve all those challenges. 13.4 is the hypothetical annual growth in agriculture. So what are the efforts that are being undertaken in Ethiopia and how realistic they are? Ethiopia, one of the things that Ethiopia is looking at, and maybe some other countries can also look at, is irrigation. And in Ethiopia, more than 90%, 95% of the agriculture is rainfed. And this is with more than 80% of the rain falling only between June, July, August, and September. So very narrow production season, and that is very constraining. And if we look at the potential, Ethiopia actually has about 11 big water basins and very big groundwater resources. With that, Ethiopia can almost produce almost produce about 5 million hectares of land, which is irrigable. Of course, for logistic reasons, most of these water basins, they are in high rainfall areas, and irrigation for those areas, how relevant, what can be done, the technical aspect, ignoring that technical aspect, but there is a potential there in the country is trying to do. For example, in 2021, Ethiopia produced cereals on almost 11 million hectares, and that is more or less similar over the last 20-30 years. By applying irrigation to that amount, about 11 million hectares of land, only to just 14% of the 5 million hectares that is possibly irrigable, Ethiopia can also reach its target, the target of 13.2% increment annually in its agriculture. Of course, again, we can also question whether what will happen to the environment. How can we take care of the environment with salinity, with the groundwater depletion, maybe with the conflict that follows, and all those kind of things. And again, can this be done under the current low input smallholder settings? So if we are going to irrigate these big lands, 14% of that, maybe millions of hectares, and can that be done? Almost more than 1.5 million hectares. We are going to convert just 14% of what is possible in Ethiopia under irrigation. Is that possible? So with those questions, there is a potential. And another is this kind of big efforts, can they be done via smallholder systems? And now I wanted to look at some land size productivity issues. And I know this is very controversial, but I am bringing up just for us to have this question, that does farm size really matter in intensification? We talk about other inputs. We talk about labor, we talk about nutrients, we talk about a lot of other inputs, but normally is size or land as an input important, land size. So I tried to look at the land size for small farms, farms that are less than 10 hectares. And generally, this normally seems a consensus that smaller land sizes are more productive in terms of per hectare yield. But then we extrapolate. If we look at this landscape in the right, it's one of the southern Ethiopian landscape. We see cats in the front, in the background, we see some perennials and some terraces, some irrigation. So this is what we are saying when we talk of lands less than 1 hectare, and we produce intensively on this. And what we do is we normally assume if we convert this 2 hectare level of intensity goes up. And with that assumption, this graph on the left shows that, okay, the smaller lands are more productive than bigger lands. But then I kept this question. Maybe what if we make it bigger units? Maybe look at bigger scales. Now the figure on the left is the same that I used on previous slide, and the one on the right, we can see land productivity actually increases with size, and the biggest seems something between 20 and 40 hectares per holding. So can we question that? Can we really question? And if we question, and we know that big lands are more productive than smaller, what can we do? Is it possible to do some form of consolidation or those sort of questions? Yeah, but yeah, I know those kind of questions are very, very sensitive also politically, but I just wanted to throw them out and maybe let them leave us food for thought. So Ethiopian government, for example, is currently trying land clustering, so trying to convince farmers for lack of another better term, convince farmers to use uniform practices, crops, and inputs and those kind of things. So the government also provides subsidy on that, and so far the report is that the government is successful. So we even have a claim that Ethiopia started to export wheat, and without commenting on that. So there is a possibility to make this land together and produce uniformly and maybe benefit from economies of scale. Generally speaking, that is possible. So all these photos, I took it from the Prime Minister's social media account. So they put all those things and fantastic. A lot of wheat is there, and these kind of things where they try to produce harvest in mass and on paper, I think this makes sense. No problem with it, but over the long term, this is going to be very expensive to the government. They are going to protect this to happen, and most often it's not easy to maintain that. It's going to be a lot of transaction cost for the government to maintain that kind of level by just convincing farmers and providing some subsidies, and in some cases even forcing them. So I doubt if that is sustainable. So what about thinking of permanent policy directions and institutionalizations for that to happen, like on a permanent basis, even when the government doesn't need to really do a lot of sort of babysitting what is happening in the fields. So with that, I pass to some alternative pathways to achieve food security in Africa. And if we look at this frame, the way agriculture is transformed. On the left, we have the fast transition. So on the x-axis toward the left, we have fast transition of labor out of agriculture. On the right, the opposite of that. On the y-axis, on the bottom, we have stagnant agricultural productivity. On the upper side, we have growing agricultural productivity. So in Ethiopia, we look at what Ethiopia did with ADLIs and all the transformation happened. It can actually fall in the inclusive structural change kind of places, where Ethiopia is trying to make agriculture more productive, and that to feed into the industries, and more labor moving from agriculture to the industries, and improve labor productivity and agricultural productivity at the same time. So that is what Ethiopia tried to do. But actually, Ethiopia could also try in this now in terms of going to the lowlands for irrigation. We can also try maybe the slow transition in terms of rural labor, but growing our agriculture fast by using relatively less productive lowland dry lands and irrigating them and using some intensive inputs, including water and mineral fertilizers, and move in that direction. So those kind of things are possibilities if we look at how agricultural transformation has been framed in Africa so far. So with that, now I also question if smallholder intensification is possible, and again use that graph where I show the proportion of labor involved in agriculture and how that inversely relates to the GDP of a country. So I think if we look at this lady with her baby and trying to hand-hoe and producing something, actually I feel smallholder agriculture is torturous the way it is now, unless we really transform. How can we intensify this in terms of labor? Is it too unproductive? Is the question. How long can this rural population be just considered a reservoir for surplus labor? In many African countries, the employment rate is low in other sectors, and it's only in agriculture. And is this really a properly productive employment for labor? Is it really good also for the guys working in this kind of environment? And what can be done? So even, for example, in cases where we see some farmers actually go for very intensive kind of input, this is a system in southern Ethiopia, cat production, vegetable production, and the lower one, the lower picture is from Jimma, where some farmers put insane amount of fertilizer on commercial crops such as pepper, spices. They put up to 1,000 kg nitrogen, urea per hectare, and they get a lot of yield from that. But what does that mean in terms of national food self-sufficiency and food security? So those kind of questions. So does that really lead to agricultural transformation when people just go for commercialization or diversification? Those kind of questions I want to throw out. And also about farm size viability. Like I said, can we really question the farm sizes, the units that we are dealing with now? From the previous graph which I put on the left here, the most productively viable size looks like something that ranges between 20 and 40 hectares. This is, of course, tentative. We have to do more exploration and confirm that, because studies in smallholders productivity actually focus on land sizes that are less than 2 hectares. And like I showed in previous slide, smaller is more productive. Smaller is beautiful. So that is a big issue. No, so if we go to the bigger land sizes, actually the 1 to 10 hectares is not as much as productive that is supposed to be. So for Ethiopian case, for example, if we think of land size and just consider that those hypothetical situations, by these differences in productivity, when we move from less than 10 tons per hectare to 20, from less than 10 hectares per holdings to 20 hectares per holdings, maybe, yeah, this is a big assumption. Maybe we can achieve those food security issues. So how can we institutionalize those cluster approaches that the Ethiopian government is taking? Can we learn something out of it? Maybe make proper detailed analysis, and if that can work at bigger scale, at continental scale, at regional scale also. So those are the questions that I want to throw out. So with that, I want to go toward the conclusion of my presentation, and in the conclusion, actually I prefer to say summary and the conclusion, and I wanted to somehow throw out to the R&D community some provocative sort of questions, and I want to question the hypothesis that smallholders are entrepreneurs or profit maximizers. Shall we question that? Can we continue with that, but still expect them to feed 2 billion Africans? Is that possible? Is that realistic? Or is that an ethical question to ask? Or will they even become is there a chance that the smallholders become so productive, produce surplus, and then feed the city population that is expected to be 2 billion over the coming less than 30 years? So another again grand, very hasty conclusion I want to make it. It's actually very difficult under smallholder conditions to repeat the miracles of green revolution. And of course I am an advocate of green revolution. Maybe partly I am from CIMMYT. Yeah, we are somehow copyrighted with that. We did that, and can we do the second one for Africa? Is it possible with the smallholders, or what are the reasons I have my doubts? For example, it's only few farmers that are really innovative and take technologies, like the farmers I showed for people in Jimma and cat production in southern part of Ethiopia, where only few farmers go for this intensive input and sometimes even overuse of input and trying to become very commercial, while the rest of the smallholders, they just remain with their maize, produce enough what is enough maybe for their households, and we are not sure if that is often the case, because the majority of the households in the rural places are food insecure. So is that possible? And of course we can attribute that to some of the risks, some of the lack of access for inputs, and those kind of things are there. But even when their accesses are there, when technologies are provided, only few smallholders are receptive to that, and I think most of the farmers are what we can call reluctant farmers, to just borrow Ken Giller's words of those farmers. And the other comment I want to make is about this land size issues. So land consolidation. I want to make purely clear here that by land consolidation, I don't mean land reform. I don't mean changes in ownership. Just to have some viable unit cluster together to work with. Otherwise, the ownership, the reform, the issues related to ownership can still be maintained. I make these claims because land reform, for example, in Ethiopia, in making privatization or keeping to the public, these kind of debates are highly politicized and also polarized. So I don't mean by consolidation, I don't mean a reform, I don't mean any form of change in ownership, but just the existing ownership and trying to merge those to make them a certain viable unit of productivity. So yeah, that is going to be challenging unless we do those kind of things, because smallholders can barely feed themselves. And that is like the picture I showed with the lady working in the farm with her baby. They are not like lazy. They work all the time in their fields. They are there, they do weeding, they do planting, they do all the things, but it's just not a viable unit to feed even themselves, and maybe make a bit of surplus to feed the urban population. And one other comment I want to make is we really need, I think, government involvement. Government should do things better than they do now. Agriculture cannot be just transformed by market forces, and I think that has been done in many Western agricultural transformation efforts. In Europe, they did a lot of agricultural segregation, moving livestock more to the mountainous areas, and the crop agriculture to the flat areas. Of course, we have issues with that, with this spatial separation of manure and crop farms. Those kind of issues are there, but still they are highly productive, and governments intentionally did some subsidies, some reward systems, and some even taxation to create that kind of things. And maybe African governments also may need to look in that direction. They should be involved with, if we need if we have to transform African agriculture, and otherwise, even very clear research indicators, research output that we have at CG and many other international R&D institutions, they are not being taken up by African governments. And I think that needs a big call and a big push from that direction. And finally, I also want to comment on our own CGL, the international R&D community. Are we looking at the food system transformation research anymore? Are we doing our plot level too much zoomed in kind of? This is a question, by the way, I'm not really concluding, but are we really looking at big pictures? Can we transform agriculture at national level, the food system at regional level? How do we do things? Are we still going with our replicated 9 treatments and 27 plots, those kind of things? Or have we already started to think big and to ask big questions? And I think unless we do those, we ask those kind of questions, actually these challenges that we are facing with the big population growth in Africa and in many other parts of the world, I think the trend shows that we are not going to feed the population enough. So that is what I have, and maybe I see we already have a couple of questions or comments in the chat. Isabel might read them to me. I think you can also take the mic to question if those are done. Thank you for your attention and everything, for your interest. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tesfaye. So I'm going to start reading the questions that we have here. What is the level of self-produced against imported foods in Ethiopia? In West Africa, it may be around 50-50 today.
Okay. So in Ethiopia, so I think I respond one by one. In Ethiopia, we import about 1 million, close to 1 million, so 1 million tons of wheat every year. So it's just that the proper data we have is that. So in terms of import, we are not a big import country, but we still import significant amount, but not 50-50 for sure. So I don't make the numbers, but they are quite small. Thank you.
One more. Is there, if there will not be labor, if labor is not needed or be needed in future agriculture, how will people make a living?
Yeah, so I think that is a big question. That's a big question, and normally I often talk to these policymakers, at least in Ethiopia and a couple of countries in East Africa, and I can see their point, and the rural labor is actually like what can I say, like a trap. You keep your population there and it's okay. And so what I'm saying is we shouldn't be making them jobless. I am saying we should make agriculture more productive and make them more productive. Be involved in the other part of the food chain, the food system, value chain, or maybe involving them in the slow but growing urban industries, agro industries, and those kind of things. So no, what is happening in the smallholders is they work most of the time in their fields, and that is the primary production kind of activity. So if we make our agriculture more productive and maybe involve them in more value added works like agro industries and other industries in around urban centers, maybe we can also make them earn better instead of just keeping them in the low labor productive kind of enterprises that we have in rural areas. So that is what I'm just saying, not making them jobless, but actually making or creating jobs that are making the labor more productive.
Yeah, thank you. There is one comment also related on this. It says, I think people with mechanized farming, less labor, can make better living. They can invest elsewhere. And then there is another question related to mechanization. What is the extent of mechanization in Ethiopia?
So mechanization, I think mechanization is one thing. So the first comment is a good one. So the first comment is a good one in a way, because instead of making these people with their 8 family members working all their lives on the small farms, maybe mechanize it and do the job in few hours and use their labor for more productive enterprises. So that is the logic. But then what is that more in my question would be like my worry, my concern, and the question that I want to answer, or I want to challenge all the R&D communities and the government is to answer it that, okay, what is that productive labor that absorbs, labor productivity centers that absorbs this labor? Once the farmer uses his 2-wheel tractor or even the bigger tractors and finishes his farming in few hours, that would take him in weeks or months. And then what is he going to do? We have to find that thing. We have to find where these farmers can really spend their productive labor and get more in addition to what they could get from the small farm. So that is a wonderful comment. And then the next is in Ethiopia, I think mechanization, I can safely say non-existent. We don't have mechanization. I mean, in the context of smallholders, of course, we have some large farms, state farms, where relatively more mechanized, but the smallholders, no, they're not mechanized. Maybe we have some project areas where we have 1,000 farmers involved in mechanization schemes using some outsourced tractors or other machines to rent during peak seasons and those kind of things. But generally, mechanization is not really a common thing in Ethiopian smallholder agriculture.
Yes, thank you. There is another comment that says that the machines we use could be made fit available niche by size and complication. But I think the issue for the food insecurity is not linked to the mechanization only. That's a comment related.
Okay.
There is another question. In the consolidated farms promoted by the government in Ethiopia, is rotation integrated or is it monocropping?
Yeah, so the one that is promoted now, it's only for wheat. So I can imagine it's going to be wheat after wheat monocropping. So yeah, I cannot speak what the government is going to plan, but based on the experiences that what the government can do, they can do wheat after wheat after wheat, and maybe that is where people like the communities that we are in, the CGR, the International Community in Research and Development, can help. Yeah, maybe put in some soy rotation and put some legumes and those kind of things. I think for now it's only a few seasons. I think 3 seasons. So last 3 seasons they made for wheat, and that is wheat after wheat, obviously.
Thank you. There is one more, a little bit related also with mechanization. Consolidation goes with mechanization. What proportion of Ethiopian lands under cereal production could fit for mechanization to consolidate?
Yeah, so yeah, this is a big question. Actually, we had this question here at CIMMYT Ethiopia. We tried to explore what proportion, because Ethiopia is a mountainous country. Not everywhere can be mechanized and can be reached by machines. So we try to look at the slopes of arable land where agriculture, where mechanized agriculture is possible. And actually, for wheat and maize, it's pretty impressive. It's not low. We did not look for other crops, and I guess maybe it's so. So it more than 50% of the land can be safely mechanized with a slope less than 10%. So that's actually a good thing. But the question about that is we did that only for wheat and maize, and I hope yeah, it can be done for the other crops, and that is big. And even if we mechanize 10% of the farm, or maybe 20%, I still feel, if it's consolidated, of course, if just making mechanization on 0.1 hectare of land, it's not going to make any sense. I think the consolidation can also be supplemented by mechanization, and I agree about that. And in Ethiopia, actually, we have quite significant proportion of land that can be mechanized.
Thank you. Don't you think this clustering approach would also lead and promote monocropping, whilst our smallholder farmers, less than 1 hectare, run mixed farming systems where they need feed, fodder, biomass, energy, including firewood?
Yeah, they do. I think my answer to that is they do. They tend to be monocrops. And now the question is, I think this is always a dilemma between diversification and specialization, right? If we are producing wheat, which is a hot crop in Ethiopia now, and very demanded on the market, you can sell and get it from the market, whatever you want. But then we also question about the functioning markets, the existence of the functioning markets. So there are a lot of things linked to each other, and I agree this is going to promote monocropping. But I also I am also of an opinion that maybe diversification, where a farmer is doing everything by having this fuel, having this food, having his feed, having his meat, having his eggs. I don't know. I know people promote this, but I am not of that group, and I think people should specialize and focus on productions that where they have a big competitive advantage, and then sell it and buy what they need from the market. So yeah, I know that is controversial, but that is my opinion.
Thank you, Tesfaye. The government of Ethiopia claimed no wheat import in 2022 and exporting over 1 million of wheat in 2023. However, you said that Ethiopia is still importing 1 million tons of wheat. Can you clarify on this?
So this 1 million ton, I said, doesn't include the 2023 data. So that is the disclaimer. And yeah, the other part, I think I cannot speak on behalf of the government, right? I don't know what they plan, but that data doesn't include 2023.
Thank you. I hope it is not possible to say that we cannot repeat the Green Revolution in African agriculture. As a smaller number of farmers currently adopt technologies, or a limited number of farmers have access to inputs, but we must think and work differently to address constraints to broader adoption and enhance input access. This is a comment.
I agree, 100%.
Excellent, thank you. Great presentation, Dr. Tesfaye. You showed both the production and population is growing. Given the good weather, soil, and water resources Ethiopia has, do you think the problem is related to inefficiency product movement? It means input, delivery, and outlet systems, rather than the increase in physical production? Mind 100 kilos of teff is 8,600 birr today.
Yes. Yes, I think I agree. I agree with the comment that productivity is not the only issue. Productivity is not the only issue. We have other issues. We have other value chain related issues. We have market issues. We have storage issues and post-harvest handling issues, and all the issues. My focus is more on the thinking, more on the thinking, and that is why I really didn't go to most of the factors that could limit productivity and food security. I rather focused on the thinking that we are stuck in, how we deal with the small lands, how do we deal with this issue of small things, and how can that be scaled. So I agree with the comment that this improved productivity is not an issue. we can do it per smallholders. And I also think that most of the related issues, the related challenges with value chain, with market product mismatch, somewhere surplus, somewhere deficit, and those kind of things also happen because the smallholders are powerless in a way. When they produce excess, the market dictates the price. They don't get enough. When they run out of, when they really don't produce enough, and they starve because they don't have mechanisms to get the products from where it's surplus. So I think I more wanted to challenge the thinking than the actual things that constrain yield.
Thank you. There is the land consolidation in places like US and France has resulted in less than 3% of population engaged in agriculture, mostly farmers indebted with banks and on their unpayable credits, and on the top, with more than 30% of the farm household income coming from non-agricultural activities. Is that the kind of development we want to see in the Global South? Maybe we need to think of agriculture beyond productivity and consider all the elements related to livelihoods of rural population, food and nutritional security, preservation of the environment, preservation of cultural values and traditions. When I see suburban poverty in Africa, I am less and less attracted to land consolidation. Thanks, Tesfaye, for this interesting presentation. This is a comment from Lopez Ridaura, Santiago. And we have one hand raised. Rabe, would you like to open your micro?
Yeah, thank you. First, to Tesfaye for this excellent presentation, how to feed our continent. Thank you for going through those perspectives and the discussion you have touched. I'll just quickly come back to, I don't know how you call it, your graphic, or it's a SWOT analysis, where you show the direction to go between, let's say, the growth of agricultural productivity and also the fast transition of labor out of agriculture. So either we go inclusive structural change or we go intensive agricultural growth. From both perspectives, taking into consideration also your presentation on land size and productivity increase versus big size, small size, would you agree in the case of Ethiopia that a mix of both, I mean, being small but also big, you showed it also through the government initiative. We have seen, let's say, a lot of row of combined harvesters in some clustered area. Would you say that is the combination potentially that Ethiopia will need? And in that case, in which orientation do you think is more or less appropriate between inclusive structural change or intensive agriculture growth? I mean, you put your file either at the left side or the right side. And last point, would you think, you said also, yeah, small size are more productive. And I hear that a comment here of 0.25 hectare, it doesn't make sense to mechanize. But obviously, we don't want those smallholders to buy machines. The model we are promoting actually in Ethiopia is service provision business model. We want them to purchase the mechanization service to increase productivity at farm level. And this will apply also at clustering farming system, which you presented also. So would you agree also of this also? I mean, not having machinery to own, but to have the service delivered to those small and medium, even to large, through consortium, for example.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Rabi. So, yeah, I think this graph, the first graph, this one, the one I am showing now, I use it only to show that what Ethiopia has followed, mainly. And the second one is what Ethiopia is trying to follow now. So otherwise, I agree with you that Ethiopia is actually trying to do or to operate in all the quadrants of this intensification labor kind of relationship. So I don't mean Ethiopia should go in any direction specific, but I'm just saying Ethiopia historically used to follow the inclusive structural change in agricultural transformation, but now they are trying to do more the intensive agricultural growth, where they try to merge land, put more intensive input, and use irrigated land in the irrigated agricultural production in the lowlands, and those kind of things. So this is just the observation, but otherwise they actually do. And if you look at the foot of these arrows, I put in the opposite arrows and try to touch all the quadrants as well. So that was the idea, to represent what the Ethiopian government has done. And to the second question, yes, I agree that is possible. That is possible. Mechanization is possible on small lands when the farmer doesn't need to own the machines himself. That is okay. If the model works, that is applicable. And I agree. I know what you do, Rabe, and that is fantastic. But my issue is the productivity was small with small land is not just mechanization. There are a lot of other issues. I mentioned about the quality issues. If as a national level, we want to aggregate the cereals from the smallholders, we are going to have different quality products, some with bad storage, aflatoxins, some rotten kind of vegetables, and they are not going to qualify for the high demand of export products that we want to benefit from. So that is true. It is possible to mechanize small through the outsourcing, through that business model. I know how effective that is, but that is not the only thing that I have with the smallholders. So for a lot of other reasons, besides mechanization, we really need larger farms based on what I observe. And to comment on Santiago's wonderful comment also, I think that is fantastic. We know the rural places, the smallholders, it's not just business. I think myself included, we actually make a mistake of considering those only as a completely productive unit. And that is the challenge that we face. It's also a cultural unit. It's also a way of livelihood. It's in general maybe an identity issue for the smallholders. But I am questioning how long can we keep that? It's fantastic. Yes, it should be there, and just for its by its own right, without the productivity question. But no, we are having too many people, and everybody is going to starve, not just them, and people in urban areas, and governments are going to suffer, and crisis, conflicts, and everywhere. So it should be a matter of choice. How are we going to deal with these kind of things? Can we do it by conserving their livelihood and then get a way around it? So most of the questions I have in this today's presentation is not really answering things, just trying to look around and what we can do. And of course, I'm not favoring elimination of the smallholder system at all, but what can we do around that? Can we do both? Can we maintain the livelihood, the way of life, that fantastic identity, and still make it more productive and try to produce surplus to feed also those guys like us just wandering in the towns?
Thank you very much. I think we have already reached the time, and we have more comment and we have more one raised, but I'm going to, if you can get in touch directly with Tesfaye, you know, he's based in Ethiopia. And this seminar is also will be available at the CIMMYT live stream, CIMMYT webcast. So you can revisit it, you can share it with your colleagues, and you can continue discussion on this important issue, and very important and reflective about how we could do better. So on behalf of Dr. Sig Snap, I thank Tesfaye Shiferaf Sida, a scientist, system agronomist, presenting this seminar, How Will Africa Growing Population Be Fed in 2050? So thank you very much, Tesfaye. Maybe one final comment?
Yeah, thank you very much, Isabel. And I think, yeah, I can see a lot of questions in the chat box, and these kind of thoughts have been around, and I think a lot of people question these kind of things, and I just wanted to acknowledge that it's not really a presentation where we make clear answers to the big questions, but also maybe involve more people who are concerned about these kind of questions. And I'm really more than happy to receive questions and maybe even criticisms about some of my outlandish comments about the small lands and the smallholder farms and those kind of things. So thank you for attending, and I really appreciate your moderation, Isabel. Also, thanks to you, and also all the audience, and please reach out to me in case I repeat or maybe I raise some important issues, but we can solidify together and maybe also produce some documents out of it in terms of papers, in terms of books, those kind of things. That is the idea behind this kind of talks. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. So have a nice day. Have a nice evening. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you very much, Tezai.
Thank you, Santiago. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Tezai.
Thank you.